Okay, now hang on.
Here.
Oh, we're gonna cry.
Sean, can you hear me now? Yes.
Okay, we're moving on from it's in the minutes, I guess. Of that, of the AZD, enclave in the AZD. I guess the review is in the minutes. You have a copy of those? I'll read it if you want. As presented by Mr. Mackey, the use of an enclave in AZD as it relates to the 10% rule would permit 1 unit per 10 acres rather than the standard development in AZD of 1 per 30 acres. Enclaves must be located at least 600 feet from external access roads and 600 feet from protected lands. A maximum of 10 and a minimum of 3 lots can be created by an enclave. One task force member requested greater description of an enclave. Ms. Gerber further described an enclave as a clustered subdivision. Ms. Reeder is in favor of the enclave concept as a permitted use in the AZD. Ms. Reeder expanded upon her opinion by stating that restrictions should be eased in order to encourage the creation of enclaves. A second member of the task force spoke against the permitted use of enclaves. The member expressed that allowing a density of 1 unit per 10 acres would create conflicts with surrounding farms. A third member expressed opposition to the enclave concept. Ms. Christensen Lewis spoke in agreement with the task force members that enclaves should be eliminated as a permitted use in the AZD. That was in our meeting summary. There was no recommendation. No. You're welcome. The request to consider the noise ordinance or to no. Okay, fine. Okay, we'll move on to new business. And I guess we hand it to either staff or Mr. Suter to begin this proposed review of the text changes in the land use ordinance.
Mr. Suter, I believe we're ready for your presentation. Do you want to try to pin him or highlight him?
Okay. Okay, well, hello everyone again, if you can hear me. Sean Suter here from ZoneCo, lead consultant on the project. We are making our way towards a full draft. I think we're there. So this is probably the first time that you all have seen a full draft, both in clean version and also a red line version showing all the changes that have been made. Obviously, the document's been reorganized for what we believe is clarity and ease of use. And one of the big things that we've done since our last meeting is we've put all of the uses in each of the districts into a use table. Very simple thing, right? Just a way to organize this so you can easily find out what you can do with your property and whether it's permitted by right in certain places, special exception, accessory uses, those kind of things. The code has a lot of uses. It just does. It's a very use-heavy code, and that makes sense because there's not a lot of development in the county, and there's not a lot of building forms to really do much with. It's a fairly low density, low population county. So we're talking more about uses. And so over time, the code has responded to various issues with use of property in various parts of the county. So you have a lot of very specific uses in here. We haven't really changed that, but we have tried to put them in a use table that is easier to use than just, dozens of listed uses and tried to clean up some of the language to the extent that we could, actually, we've left it mostly alone. But, use tables are typically fairly straightforward. Some of your uses have a little bit more to them, but so that's what we've done there. That's kind of a good thing, I think. You'll note that the standards are also in tables in each of the districts. So hopefully that'll make things a little easier to use and administer. You'll see the graphics throughout too that we've added in. Our partner consultant added in too, which I think are quite nice and hopefully help explain some of these complex subjects in a very simple way. And then you also see that we have now a comprehensive use table or master use table in the documents. So you can look in one place to find all of the uses across all the districts. So if you're looking at property in a certain district, or more likely if you're looking at a certain use and you want to know where it's allowed in the county, you can just look at that comprehensive use table. I think that's going to be pretty beneficial. We talked signs last time. We really haven't made too many, really any substantive changes since our last discussion. Most of it's been formatting, getting this all into one document. It was in a Word document that was impossible. It was so huge that we had a hard time opening it. So we've now put this in a PDF that's easy to open and should be easy to use. You'll see the sign regulations have been put in here. So everything's in one place now. If you wanted to read this 450-page document cover to cover, you now can. We have, but I don't know how many other people have, but you're welcome to do so. At this point, we're looking for any feedback that anyone has so that we can really get this document in a place that's ready for the larger public to take a look at later this year. And we can start advancing this ordinance towards review and adoption, hopefully early first part of next year. So with that, I don't have much more to present. Just more interested in your reactions and comments, anything that's jumped out at you since our last meeting, so that we can address those things and move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. Members of the task force, any questions or comments as we reviewed it? Yes. 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 Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and we'll know Mr. Sutton is attending now too. Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and we'll know Mr. Sutton is attending now too. Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and we'll know Mr. Sutton is attending now.
There are a
too.
few things here that I'm probably nitpicking about, but
Mr. Sutton, and we'll know Mr. Sutton
start off
is
with
attending
there are
now,
a
too.
few things here that in the agricultural zone or AZD. I didn't quite understand the very first diagram, which supposedly illustrates the desired character of the ag zone district. I could understand when we got into subdivisions or housing areas or village or any of the others. I could understand when we got into subdivisions what that represented housing areas like a village or any of the others. I could understand when we got into subdivisions. Is that what you're saying? Housing areas like a village or any of the others. I could understand when we got into subdivisions. Is that what you're saying? Housing areas like a village or any of the others. I could understand when we got into subdivisions. that represents housing,
So
like a
that's
two-bedroom,
Walmart.
any diagram, I could understand
This is
when we got
generally
it, so is that represents housing,
conservative
like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, any diagram, I could understand when we got it, so is that represents housing, like a two-bedroom, that's all I gave us when we got it, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, any of them, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, any of them, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, any of them, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, any of them, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, any of them, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, yeah, that way, or that was my, that was the first thing, but then as we go along, yeah, that way, or that was my, that was Anyway, it says the parcels created before the date of ordinance do not. Anyway, it says two permitted parcels created before the date of now that is do not. Anyway, it says two permitted parcels created before the date of right now that is do not. Anyway, it says two we're now parcels created before the date of right now that is do not. Anyway, it says two we're now parcels right now that is anyway, it says two we're now parcels right now that is anyway, it says two we're now parcels right now that is so we're now right now that is so we're now that would not allow that is so that would not allow that is
Anyone else out here? Anyone else out here? Anyone else out here?
12 lots per acre for Intense Village. The math doesn't seem to work for me there.
I'm trying to get there here. Let's see.
25.3 and 26.4.
Okay, 25.3 and 26.4. Okay. All right. So this, let's see here. Looking here, so it's 25.3 density, area, height, width, and yard requirements for all new construction and additions except for two-family, townhouse, and multifamily. So this should not have a dwelling units per acre in it. This should only have a minimum lot size. And then if you go down to the 25.4, that's only for multiple family attached type buildings. So that would be 8 lots. Should be 8 units per acre. Because you're on one lot, you're talking about a multi-unit building. It says lots. Write that down.
So the 8 lots per acres for townhouses, basically.
Yeah, could be two-family townhouse and multifamily uses. So that's 8 units per acre. So you've got about 5,000 square foot per 5,000 square foot of land per unit, if you will. Doesn't, it's not the same if you're stacking them, but for like a townhouse, that's what it would come out to.
How do we do that in our current ordinance? Yeah, I mean, for village, we just did square footage, or was 4 lots per acre or something? How did we address townhouses there?
We didn't.
We don't have a clear direction on how to mess that out. And that is one of the things that Sean pointed out as a comment, that maybe we should consider having distinct standards for townhouses and multifamily versus single family.
Thank you. Other comments?
Oh, I have another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody, Mr. Bill.
Bill, go ahead.
People out there went to that place again 25 years ago. All of that. Yeah,
That's what I say.
that's listening. That's 25 years old, right?
At least.
That's all I got.
Thank you, Bill. Pat, do you have something?
Yeah, the other question I have is about is it the rural character? Is that the one when you combined? Right, and weren't they different densities? Which was the larger? Right. We went with that. I was reading that and I thought they were combined and I couldn't remember which one we went with. Okay, that answers that question. Shoot, let me look at my list. Oh, Sean, I have a question. In Article 3, what do the yellow highlights mean? Maybe I was reading and didn't interpret that properly.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is a section I think that we still need to do some work on. And the yellow highlights were just for us mainly. What?
Sean, I can answer because I'm the one who did the yellow highlighting.
Okay.
So the yellow highlighting is just referencing zoning districts. You can see
Yeah,
that, and this is a section we know we need to work on.
okay.
And the point of this was we took all of the uses, put them into one listing, and the highlighting indicates various districts where it might have, I'm looking at, I printed a really small copy. I opened a solar energy systems. And so it looks like in employment center, we have one standard, and in industrial, we have a different. So we need to figure out which one we want to use.
Right, but I just noticed there was a highlighting and I was trying to figure what did it mean? I thought there was somewhere that had indicated what it was and I went, nope.
It's strictly for us to be able to recognize where we have
Okay,
zoning districts, the same use, but there's a slightly different standard in different districts.
okay. Very good. Thank you.
We have the public online, some and some here in the audience. Do any of them have lists to comment or questions about the proposed changes? Yes, come on forward, please.
Paula Reeder from Stowe Pond. First of all, going through this kind of a document, which was just published prior to this meeting, is literally impossible. I'm glad it's been published and that you've taken the time to put it together. I think that's commendable. But the public needs time to digest, to review and digest this in order to get appropriate public comment. The agenda for this meeting that was published that states things as recommendations isn't so much a statement of recommendations as it is simply a log of the votes taken in these meetings. So there's absolutely no way to discern what the real recommendation or how that got translated into this document actually occurred without reading the 452 pages of the document. So I think it's incumbent on this committee and on local government and planning, and I'm sure they intend to do so, to provide the public with a clear and reasonable opportunity to review this document and come back with comments that ultimately get it digested and considered and hopefully listened to by the governance of this county. Now, I understand this document is not going to be presented for a final vote until after this election, when new commissioners are installed, who themselves won't have an opportunity to review and digest this in any real fashion unless permitted to do so. So this is significant. This has a significant bearing on our county and its future. As I read the recommendations that are put forth, a lot of it, as far as I can understand them, is Kent County simply saying no again and again and again. We can't do that, in my opinion. So I hope you'll take my views and recommendations to heart, that you will recommend an adequate review period and appropriate public hearings on this document when the time comes. Otherwise, the work of this committee will not be able to be thoroughly appreciated and understood by the residents of the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public who'd like to testify or to comment? Come forward.
I do have a question, having
State your
listened.
name for the tape,
Oh,
please.
Janet Christensen Lewis,
Thank you.
Millington.
Thank
I
you.
do have a question after listening to that. What is being put forth here today has no real changes other than the changes that we agreed to combine districts. This is our code, right? We haven't, the task force hasn't made, is that correct? They haven't made any changes here, right? This is our code, but he's just trying to organize it, and then changes can be made. Is that correct?
Yes.
But for instance, when we've talked about things and brought them up, no decisions have been made on many of those large things, which would be incorporated later.
Janet, can you hold for a second? I got a text from Cindy Genther. They can't hear us. I can't. Cindy, can you?
So we could not hear you for quite a while, but I am sorry, Janet. But now we can hear you speaking, and some of the speakers, Miss Christensen Lewis, we can hear her. We heard Paula Reeder, but my text was from about 10 minutes ago. But if anyone speaks, we couldn't hear Carlo there for a bit. Just so I'm just clarifying.
Thank you. We'll
okay?
make sure we get everyone to the mic. Sorry about that, Cindy.
Okay, well, I'll let, but I thought we were just commenting on this form, Matt. Did I misconstrue that? Okay, all right. I have a couple of comments here. In the first, excuse me, this is a huge document. My God. And I didn't make it all the way through it either. Oh, okay. In the very first thing under Article 1, Section 4, you have combined employment district and industrial district, but then you go on to have an industrial critical area, L&M. So I'm wondering why it wasn't employment critical area or how that works. Do you see where I'm talking about?
Sean, do you have a?
So it doesn't seem that there's a consistency in what you've named there.
Yeah.
I assume that that's something that you would do. You would decide what it was going to be called, right?
Yes. I was looking here. Employment Center, yeah. We certainly can, yes.
Wouldn't you have to in order for that to be understood? Because if we don't have an industrial area, how can there be an industrial critical area?
Yeah. I'll have to look back at that, but I'll note that. That's a good comment.
I also would like to see the adaptive reuse, as you stated you would do, moved over to permitted by right. I think I agree that it would be more encouraging for people to reuse historic structures if they could just make an adaptive use and go ahead and do it, as long as it was a use that was permitted in that particular, what they were going to adapt it to was permitted in that particular district. So that's nothing new. Oh, gosh. You see, some of these have already been answered. So is there a place in the entire document, I didn't have time to look at our thing, where community sewage systems are defined?
To search it, I don't know offhand.
Hmm?
I'll have to search it. I don't know offhand.
Well,
Community
because
sewer
in
systems?
in section Article 220.3, you have that the density, if you're on agricultural zoning, the density is 3/4 of an acre if you have on-site septic, but it's a 1/2 acre if you have community sewage.
Yeah. So that's going to be public sewer.
That's public? That's not like there is such a thing as
I don't
putting in
know.
yeah.
I think the intent is probably.
Okay, all right. All right. Am I being too nitpicky here for you? I know it's hard to thumb through this.
Yeah, no, it's a big document. There's a lot of stuff in here. And yeah.
Okay. This runs throughout the document, and I have the same criticism of all of these illustrations, and you can go to page number 27.
Okay.
I find I'm a very visual person. I find these drawings to be abstractions that are very difficult to wade through to actually, I think they're really difficult. I mean, somebody looking at that would think that they had to have a lot that was 195 feet deep or 190. I know you're trying to put it, but I think it would perhaps be better if you had multiple examples of what, it could be a square lot, it could be an oblong lot, it could be many different things. But to me, and I may be the only one that's having trouble with this. I don't think that that illustration is very helpful. Or any of them that are done in this particular style.
That is a regulatory graphic, yep. And it is plan view. Let's see here. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think what we need to add in here maybe is just a description of maybe an explanation of, I mean, you have to have some lot length in order to be able to show the various dimensions here. So
Right, I
that's
think,
why.
yeah, I agree with that, but I think that you need to show, I think you need more than one illustration. I think you need some illustrations that would give you this half-acre lot in a, you could have a lot of smaller ones that would show it in different configurations so that somebody looked at that and said, oh, this is the most like my lot, and that's what that looks like, sort of. I know it's probably elemental to you because you look at this all the time, but if you're trying to do graphics for the general public to be able to look at to make it easier for them to understand, I think that this graphic doesn't really cut it.
Okay.
Just
We'll take a
my
look at 'em.
opinion.
Yeah, we'll take
Okay.
a look at that
Because they're all the way through here. You've got several of them.
yes.
You've got them in all different variations. And I would just think, for instance, the illustration that you have, it's figure 5, illustrating the desired character of the resource conservation district. When I look at that, I see exactly, I mean, that is so clear, exactly what that's supposed to look like. And I know that in the other ones, you're having to put in 20 feet from the road and stuff, but I just think that those could be much clearer.
So your preference would be to use this, we call it a bird's eye view in figure 5 and maybe do the dimensions based on a bird's eye view rather than a plan view?
I don't know, but the plan view, I think what's happening here is you're doing a plan view of one iteration of what a half-acre lot would look like.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't look like somebody's lot, if their lot is square and not a long rectangle, they're going to be looking at that and thinking, oh, that doesn't look like my lot. I mean, they need some illustrations that are going to be closer, and there's only so many configurations you can do, right? I mean, you could get closer. You could maybe have 2 or 3 different iterations of what a half-acre lot might look like.
Well, I think, let's see here. Let me just look down at the other ones.
They all do the same thing. There's 3/4 acres.
I'm gonna say that looks like an ag lot to me, but let me look down here. Do we do it any differently? No, they're all like that. Okay.
They're all like that. It's just my suggestion
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. It's a good suggestion.
Because I'm really visual and I love to look at pictures to get my information. But I looked at those and it was really difficult for me to decipher. What's the brown thing? What's the,
Yeah, Sean, I would jump in here and make a similar comment. I think the colors in this particular figure 3 throw you off a little bit. Like Ms. Christensen Lewis said, what is the brown square? What is the gray one? Is that a driveway and a concrete pad?
Yeah.
I don't think the colors are necessarily helpful there. And then just the other piece of this diagram is that it's almost like it's trying to do too much in one diagram. It's showing a half-acre lot, but then referencing when you have a 3/4 acre lot with an individual septic system, maybe we need a diagram for that. Same thing with the road frontage. So it's like there's just a little bit too much thrown in there. And then the colors, I don't think help toward understanding what we're showing.
Okay. All right. we'll take a look at those. See if we can make them clear.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going through this. I'm trying to eliminate the ones that are actually talking about. I'm just going to the content or the way it looks in and of itself. So I'm skipping through here and I'm trying to make sure don't reiterate. I'm sorry this is taking so long, but this is a damn big document to be thumbing through. And yeah. That may have been the bulk of I mean, I had some of the same issues that Pat brought up about putting the two things together, but I think my question was answered by we went with a larger size lot in that case. So that probably was the bulk of it. I know I had another comment about something that I didn't. Jeez Louise.
Well, let me see if there's anyone else out there has comments or
Okay.
questions. You can stay there until if you find it. Anyone on the stream have any questions or comments for Sean? Cindy?
So, hey,
Go ahead.
this is Cindy Genther. I'm sorry I missed the roll call. I was here, but I didn't hear my name. But I just have a general observation. So one of the goals that we had before we started this whole process was to simplify our land use ordinance, I think. We ended up with a document that's 450 pages from a prior document from the 2002 land use ordinance that was 329 pages. Our new land use ordinance for our new sign code is 18 pages versus 6 pages previously. As a person who uses the land use ordinance multiple times a week, this has become more complex in my just cursory view of this document than the old one was. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Sean, you have any reaction to that?
I definitely hear you. This is one of the bulkiest ordinances, and I don't know if 3-something is correct. I think it's more like 500 pages you've got now, but this is one of the bulkiest ordinances, most prescriptive ordinances we've ever worked with. But I think that's because it's so use focused. You know, you've got every kind of thing in here. So it is going to be bulky. I wouldn't focus on the pages as much because we've laid it out different. If we just ran this in words, you know, like you've got now, just paragraph after paragraph, it would probably be shorter, but we put in all these graphics and all these tables and things, so that's going to make it a little longer. We've also split out the uses. You've got like, I don't even know how many uses in Article 3, dozens of pages of uses in Article 3 that they were in each of the district sections and then repeated over and over again. So we split those out into a section. So I wouldn't focus too much on that. Your point is good though. I mean, there's, you know, my personal opinion, which, you know, doesn't matter, but my opinion is that you've got a way too prescriptive ordinance for the size of the county, and the number of people and the simplicity of the land use. But you know, my understanding is that the ethos in the county is to regulate things very precisely. You've got a lot of different things going on. You've got to regulate the conservation areas, so that's a large part of it that can't change. So it's more complicated than it needs to be, in my opinion. But this is reorganized to try to make it easier to deal with, to use. Hopefully it's a little easier if you can use charts and tables and graphics in addition to all these words and rearrange some things. But no, I would agree. We have not made a significant change to this land use structure in the county at all.
Thank you, Sean. Did you have something else?
I mean, actually, that was exactly where I was going to. By the time if you're able to put all these things into these master use tables, will you be able to decrease the words?
I would love to. That's going to be up to you all to tell me. Yeah, I would
I mean,
love
all
to
those things would have to be
streamline this.
defined,
Right.
but maybe it wouldn't take so much to define them. And then if they go into a master use table, you would be able to see that that was allowed in your district. And then you could see what the definition of that was. But wouldn't that in some ways consolidate? I mean, I thought that's why you did the yellow highlighting, was to be able to put them into the master table. I guess I misunderstood that.
Now,
And
what you've got is, and this is somewhat unique. I mean, it is so regulated, the land use in the county, that you've got a different, so most places we work have uses that have special use regulations. So for example, I don't know, outdoor entertainment. But what you've got is outdoor entertainment is regulated differently in one zone than it is from another zone. In some cases, you've got one use that's regulated with different conditions on it in 3 to 4 or 5 different zones. So you've not only got uses by zone, you've got special considerations for each use for each zone. So the layers of regulations is pretty astounding, I got to be honest. But my understanding is that is something that, you know, it protects, people view as protecting the county. But no, I mean, I think there are still ways we could definitely streamline this. And Article 3 is one where I would love to get into and figure out a way to cut that down, way down. I'm all about streamlining. So,
Sean, do you have
Yep.
an example of a county like ours that you've done that you could share? Just they're online. We just tell us where it is and we'll look at it. A lot of people.
Sure. I mean, we have codes that we've done all over that we can certainly share. But the main difference between this code and other codes is the fine grain regulating of every potential use. And I think that just comes from over the years, just responding to issues, right? Like one of my favorite examples from your code that I use is the school bus parking. You know, we have all this language in here about school bus parking. Well, clearly that was a problem at one point. I don't know if it still is, but and that became that was an issue that was addressed. And so you just start layer caking on regulations into this code over the years and addressing every single issue that comes up. And this is what you end up with. So but that has to be a policy decision of the county to say, maybe we don't need to do all that. Here's the things we really care about. Maybe we don't care about some of these things. And you just have to go through each one of these and say, is this still an issue? Do we care? Is a cemetery really different in the AZD versus the RC versus the RR versus the CAR versus the CR versus the V? I don't know, but that's the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves if we're going to actually streamline this thing.
Well, I would also like to see an example that you could show us what a county's done that's similar to ours, the same size and things. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other comments or questions from the audience or task force? Jamie,
Sure,
I see you may have been on, Jamie. I didn't see if do you have
That's
anything to say?
okay. Yeah, I do. And it's kind of a mixture of questions, information. So bear with me here. I guess the first thing I want a clarification as well. So there was the list of recommendations from the task force, and I just want to clarify that I understood correctly. They are not incorporated into the new document yet. That will be done at a later time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the intent. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha. And then the other thing, I had the same comment as Janet's about the employment center versus industrial. and deciding, making it consistent. I think industrial kind of sounds better. Employment center, I've not heard that as much. So that was kind of odd to me as a zoning district, but I'm not a planner either. So it might be something that's very common. So I just wanted to point that out. My preference would be industrial. The other thing that this is kind of like an informational piece that I think we just need to be considered and consider and be aware of. We are talking about workforce housing and affordable housing in Kent County and just housing availability overall, and the need to increase residential and in businesses to increase county revenues to support the services and keep up with services. There is a report, it's a white paper from the White House, and I can actually share this with Bill so he can share it out to the task force. But I just wanted to make everyone aware of this paper, and it's about the new actions to ease the burden of housing costs. And this, under the plan, it says that they will reward jurisdictions that have reformed zoning and land use policies. So, when I think about the changes or recommendations, and I don't understand density very well, but from everything that I could put together from this document, I do feel that I was able to, can someone, okay, I'm good. Oops, sorry, my watch went off. Sorry about that. So I think what I concluded from this is that even in the most intense zoning district within the county, which is the intense village, you can only have 12 housing units per acre. So just thinking, we might want to reconsider that going forward if affordable and workforce housing is something that we're really focused on. But I'll share the white paper as well. So I just wanted to point that out. This next thing I wanted to kind of go over was when I was looking at the two items on the sign regulations from the last meeting in July, it says, as a next step, the amount of signage permitted overall may be reviewed. And then it goes on to say, in the review, to be effective, signage regulations in the land use ordinance should be adjusted to meet contemporary best practices while maintaining aspects that address and preserve the unique character of Kent County. But it goes on to say even further that a discussion of signage size will follow at a subsequent meeting. And I just want to make sure that that is indeed still on our radar, because I do feel like signage needs to be discussed a little bit further. I know of 4 instances that have been a sign issue, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not taking sides on those, but I think it's worth a discussion. The next thing that I had is another goal that I understood was to make the land use more business friendly so that we could have some growth in the industry sector. And I think adding additional forestation is one of those things that are going to make it tougher for development to come to Kent County. I think that developers will see that as an anti-business move and they will move on. So I would ask that we consider that. And I think by the nature of Kent County being so agricultural, obviously you can't drive a tractor through the forest. So I think by nature of what we are very deforested, but that is a result of our agricultural nature. So I wanted to point that out. And then the last thing is probably a question. And I just wanted to know where we were with the short-term rentals, because the town of Millington recently adopted, and I think it was at their last meeting actually, new ordinance for short-term rentals. and Chestertown had done the same earlier. And we are really focused on trying to educate and make our short-term rental owners aware of the county tax that needs to be submitted. And I just, from the recommendation, I can't really tell what the recommendation is. And I don't know if it helps, but that's on page 3 of 8 on the task force recommendations. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Jamie. Bill, I guess if there are any more comments on the, for Sean, and I'd love him to stay on, but if, I don't know if he needs to.
Staff's gonna have some things.
Okay, good. All right.
Yep.
But we'll get,
Well-
okay, so.
So, hey,
I-
this is Cindy. I have one more comment. Cindy Ginther. I have one more comment. I would support Sean's comment of helping us to streamline our land use ordinance, and and give us ideas on how to make that happen. I also support the comments that Jamie made, and I will go back to muting right now.
Thank you. Okay, the question is, do we want to take a break now, or it's up,
It is break time, that's true.
okay. Yeah, before we start, we'll take 7 minutes, 10 after 7, be back.
Okay.
Thank you.
raised in the public comments, and I would recommend that perhaps folks might want to return and make some follow-ups once they know the answers to these questions. So what you have before you tonight are two separate items, and I realize that perhaps that wasn't clear to everyone. You have the land use ordinance text document from our consultant, and you have the list of recommendations that you all have been developing for the specific text changes that were submitted by the public and by the board and by staff. So the document is the document that we have been working on with the consultant that you, and by we, I mean you all, and along with us assisting you, to walk through specific topics to make changes to the land use ordinance. And we've talked about combining districts. We've talked about adding graphics. We've talked about using matrices. From the diagnostic report, there were limited specific text changes. We talked about changes to the sign code, and we talked to changes to non-conforming uses. So that discussion has been put together into the document you see. So all those things have been before you before. You've talked about those issues. This combines those all together into a document for you to see. We requested that they do it in track changes so you can compare and see sort of all the things that came in and out of that process. But that is a distinct process, and it is in essence our code with those things that we've talked about along the way for about a year. The recommendations document is my attempt to embody what you all discussed about those specific text changes. Those specific text changes are requests by members of the public, by this board, by staff, that are not incorporated into this consultant document. That list is intended to be a list, a sort of a to-do list that once we have your final version of those recommendations, will go before the Board of County Commissioners when they're looking at this document, and essentially they will consider your recommendations and decide do they or do they not want these specific issues incorporated into the text of the land use ordinance. So that's sort of the big issue, and I apologize if there was misunderstanding on that. We've sort of been following a two-track system through this process for, I think we're closing in on 2 years. I can address some of the things I think that were raised. My understanding about the signage was we talked about we could review the signage again, but my read of this group was there was not interest by the task force to propose changes to the area of the signage at this time. And I think the same thing for the Forest Conservation Act changes, that I didn't see any sort of response from the task force for us to pursue that further. Those will both proceed to Board of County Commissioners when that time comes, because there's recommendations related to that, and they'll make decisions about whether to further address those kind of amendments. All of those amendments, at least my plan, is to present all of those amendments and your recommendations as sort of a to-do list to Board of County Commissioners. Concerning the document stuff, we posted the document that you have before you, the one from the consultant that we've been working on for a while, 2 weeks ago, trying to give folks lots of time to be able to review it. And this meeting is public. We've had the public involved all along the way, but the public forum is in December. So December is really where we're going to, do our radio ads, really do outreach for people to come in and talk about where this document and what we have in this document. So I think that there are some issues that the task force may want to give direction to our consultant about pursuing further. So those changes can be made in anticipation of the December 14th meeting, if you so desire. I want to later in this meeting talk about, did I get your recommendations right for the list of specific text changes? There's been a few more added at the very, very end for the last 2 meetings we had. And last of all, I think there was concern that, for members of the county commission that, bringing them up to speed. We will proceed at the speed that the Board of County Commissioners instructs us to proceed at. So that's certainly within their purview. In the biggest of pictures, comprehensive rezoning and zoning code amendments are a legislative process, and that legislative process sits firmly under the control and purview of the county commissioners. So they will certainly direct me at sort of what they would like to see done and at what speed, et cetera, and we'll follow that speed. The current plan is to try to get a legislative first item before them at the beginning of the calendar year so that they can, it can be introduced and they can consider what they'd like to do. So I hope that's all helpful and makes sense.
Thank you, Bill. That's very
Yeah.
helpful.
Thank you.
Any questions for Bill from
Yeah.
audience or members of the task force? Yeah, go ahead. Come up. Get
can you
entered-
come up because
they're not hearing
on the computer. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Annie Richards, Chester Riverkeeper with Shore Rivers. I am just curious, I know that the public forum comment process in December is coming, and as are a more detailed list of all of the recommendations that the task force has made and discussed. And I'm wondering what the timeline is for public review to be able to look over those proposed changes before they provide that comment on December 14th. So how long will the public have to be able to digest all of that?
In the packet tonight, I'm hoping to get sort of final assent from the task force that this is indeed a good reflection of what they said. So that document is public now. So folks have till December 14th to sort of frame their reflections. We've been working sort of slowly on the big document. So I think tonight I'm going to ask Carla to come up and sort of go through. There's some notes sections in this, and that to sort of point out these are the notes, and do we want to get more changes from the consultant on those in those note areas, and then those we would publish in advance of the December meeting whenever the consultant has those ready. So we try to get things pushed out multiple weeks in advance.
That's great. Thank you. And then I also just wanted to clarify, when the commissioners review the recommendations that are made by the task force, at the same time, are public comments and public recommendations reviewed at the same time by the commissioners, or public comments influence task force influences commissioners? I'm just trying to clarify the flow.
So when we get to the legislative process before the Board of County Commissioners, they will be in control of that process. I can tell you that the standard process that's used is there's a meeting where items are introduced, so everyone's aware of them and it's made publicly available and they can see them. There's a public hearing held, potentially more than one, depending on, what commissioners want to do. During that public hearing, the public bring in their comments on any and everything involved with that legislation. And then there's a meeting where the Board of County Commissioners considers the public input, the original document, and they can adopt, modify, and make amendments. That's the process for a simple bill. This is a legislative process. It is a bill. I would imagine that there will probably be more than one meeting because it's a large item, but that's the process. So the public get the opportunity to make open comments at that public hearing, which can include anything the public want to bring forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Did you say that, that Carlos coming up with?
Yes, what we'd like to do is there were a variety of issues raised by the consultant in the notes section of the document. I think we've been talking about these for about a year. And so we just want to highlight, does the task force wish to see more work on these items or not? So, and I think that Article 3 uses section, right, at some point, we will be looking for the consultant to combine the uses, reduce, propose some text that we could consider that addresses the fact that there's 6 categories for cemetery, et cetera. So I think, and in defense of how the code is set up, the code is set up with specific list of uses for each and every district, as most codes are. Over time, changes can be proposed to any part of the code. So over time, there's accumulated changes that build up in different districts, not on purpose, not by, some idea to make things separate, but, when things are amended, they may not be amended in every section. When someone comes forward with a change, it may only change one district. And over 20 years, those kinds of things add up. And that's why you have a review. So I think that's a very natural occurrence. It's part of how zoning documents, which are living documents, evolve over time. So I think, I see nods. So thank you. Carla.
Hello again. So as Bill mentioned, we noticed that in the notes for the track changes that there were a couple of 6 or 7 points that were noted as being per the diagnostic report, changes should be made. And so, for example, there's a repeated note that says the combined uses and structures unnecessarily complicate the district regulations. And there are several others. And I guess the point would be we can go through them and I guess decide if it's something we feel worthwhile for the consultant to give us feedback on as to what they would recommend. So that would be things that would make changes to our current text, but would be more along the lines of kind of the consolidation, the simplification. I think that's most of what these address.
Sort of.
So so like I said, the first one dealt with how our uses deal with. Nope.
Yeah. Page 127.
No, it's okay. I know the first example, and it's repeated over and over, is on page, it looks like 15. So at each of the. Yep. So each of the uses table, there's a note about how our current uses are a combination of actual uses and structures. And so I think at one point, Sean kind of put forward the idea that maybe you should have a set of uses and then you have a set of structures as opposed to the way we combine them all. I'm trying to think of what a good example might be. I guess like a country inn is a use. A waste management structure it's kind of both a use and a structure, but the regulations are more about the structure than the use. So poultry houses. So each zoning district that comment is made. And I know that is one of the things that Sean pointed out from the very beginning as something that he thought was problematic with our ordinance. No,
just wait, please. Okay. Thank you.
So another one which we've already touched on a little bit is how in the village and intense village district, there's a recommendation that the building forms, whether it's single family or townhouses, multifamily, should have a set of unique standards. And I think we would all agree that that's probably necessary, because I know whenever I try to talk to somebody about what a townhouse is and how you deal with minimum lot size and density in townhouses, it's really confusing. Because it's not really clear as to what, does each townhouse need 9,500 square feet or not, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Sean pointed out that we should consider updating and modernizing the list of uses in both our industrial and commercial zones. I know that blacksmithing is one of the listed things that's listed in there, and print shops are things that are listed as being permitted uses, and maybe we need to make that a little more modern. He made a recommendation that accessory dwelling units be allowed in all zoning districts, but that if necessary, standards be customized to the context of the zoning district. There's a recommendation that home occupation should be overhauled and be modernized, that again, he felt they were outdated. And then there were some comments about how our parking standards, again, I think this is all about modernizing, what is essentially a 30-plus-year-old document, because the current ordinance really is very similar to the one that was adopted in 1989. So I guess we're looking maybe for some feedback from the task force as to do we want to give Sean direction and ZoneCo direction to move forward with making those changes as noted in the diagnostic report? Are there things that and I'm hoping that he's back on and listening to us. If he has anything he'd like to say.
I'm here.
Okay, good. Or if you've got other comments or questions. So. John, did I kind of summarize what I picked up as related to the diagnostic report?
Yes, that's all okay. Right on, exactly.
Go ahead, Pat.
The only thing I would have to say would be, I think we should try to get updated to the modern, even in terminology, some places. I picked up on honey wagon, like, okay, really? So that, and then the other one, and I think I've mentioned it before, and it runs throughout the document in the AZD particularly, is where the references to feedlots. Well, it should be animal feeding operations because they don't live out in the lot in most cases. They're usually in buildings. So animal feeding operations needed to be put in there. So yeah, changing more, not only terminology, but modernizing it like was suggested in some of the places I had noted. See, when I was reading it.
Thank you, Beth. Anyone else on the task force?
Yes, this is Cindy Genther. I support all of the notes and the recommendations from combining and consolidating uses. I support modernizing the uses, particularly in industrial and commercial, and updating those to current modern standards and uses. And all of the recommendations that came out of Sean through the notes were, I agree that those should all be incorporated.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else have some direction? Yes, go ahead.
Billy Norris on the task force. I'm hearing a lot of stuff about modernizing the whole ordinance and the terms and everything else, but I think along with that, there should also be some modernization of the timeframes and the dates set in the ordinance. But what's the point of modernizing terms and everything else if we're not going to update some of the dates on when we go retroactive back to? So I think that should be looked at a little closer. And I would agree with Cindy on the simplification of the whole document. It doesn't seem like we've really simplified much at all. And I think that was the whole idea of this whole process was to simplify our ordinance, which it seems like we're adding more restrictions and making it just as difficult as it was before. And I thought we were trying to work on that. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone from the public? I think you had a question before. Yeah, Ms. Lewis.
Mine is strictly a question. Because I thought it was kind of interesting, when you were talking about differentiating against use and structure, would that mean that, for instance, in a district, you'd have a table that would what was allowed, what kinds of operations could occur there, and you'd also have a list of structures that were allowed? Is that?
I think I'm gonna let Sean, if he doesn't mind answering. I know that was something that you harped on from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think there's a conflation of uses and structures here. We're not really prescribing the form of the structure. We're really prescribing here the uses. So the two things are not the same. And I think it's much simpler and more accurate to regulate the uses within the structure rather than trying to define every type of structure as well.
This is Bill Mackey. I just want to comment, John. I think at least my observation is there's a couple of these conflations that you've highlighted. There's places where we talk about use, and I know some folks have talked about, do we want to define those uses? The problem is we have regulations embedded in descriptions of uses. So I would see that perhaps we could migrate some of those structural regulations into, for example, the dimensional standards table, right? That might be a place where those could migrate. So, and then uses would only address the actual use in the property and not setbacks related to the building that that uses. Those setbacks might be, again, migrated over to dimensional standards. And then all of the structures are regulated under dimensional standards. All the uses are described under a use table without regulations. And then you would only need to include definitions in very particular circumstances where the code addresses a term that's not addressed in the normal manner in the dictionary. I think that's usually how definitions work. So,
Can you give me a really good example of what you're talking about?
yeah, thank you. That'd
I'm
be the
sorry,
first
go
one I
ahead,
would
do
go
it.
for, would be poultry houses. We sort of describe, it is a use, we describe setbacks for that use, and we don't need to necessarily define the term. I think it's a fairly well-known term, but we should probably tease out what's a setback, what's the use itself, and where do those go in the code? Right, we have a single place where multiple things are happening. Go ahead, Carla.
No.
Oh, okay.
For example, we have a use of a poultry house.
Okay.
And within that use, there are standards that are outlined underneath it, then one of them being that poultry houses have to be 600 feet from the property line.
Okay.
So that is both a conflated, it's a good term, I get use. I mean, it's permitted structure, it's a permitted use. And so Bill is suggesting that those types of setback requirements could be located in the bulk standards table where all the other setbacks are, and that the use itself is just poultry house.
So in the agricultural district, poultry houses are allowed, period.
If you can meet a set of
Okay.
standards.
And then in a standards table, what you've put here, the standards for that would be like it can't be this close or whatever would be in that table. So that table would be totally separate.
And that table exists.
Right.
Right, currently. It just doesn't have all the dimensional standards.
Right, so that we would add to that table right now, say, for example, we have fences and we have like height standards for fences. So we would just add another category that might be, animal ag structures.
But there's also exceptions. So how do you put that how do you make that happen? I mean, there are just naturally occurring exceptions to all setbacks and all those things. I mean, those are in the code. Not necessarily for a chicken house, but for other things.
Well, I mean, if you can't meet the required setbacks in the code, then you would go for a variance.
Okay, so that would be.
So you would still you can do that now. You would still be able to do that. It's just how it's organized in the ordinance to try to remove some of those dimensional requirements that relate to the structure, not the use.
Could Sean do just a few things and show us what that would look like? I mean, again, we haven't seen any material of a county that you've done in the past that we could look at. And so is there any way for you to tease out just a little bit of this and look at it? I mean, I'm not the task force, so that may not be what they want, but I mean, I kind of get what you're saying, but I still think it's a difficult concept to kind of see if we can't see it. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else in the public have a comment before Sean addresses that question? Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the typical way that these codes go is you have uses, right? So what's permitted, what's not permitted, or what's permitted, what's a conditional use or special exception. So you've got that listed, and then each zone has those uses. So that's standard across zoning, across all types of communities. And then you have lot and building standards, right? So that's what we've got in our code as well. You have all the setbacks and height and building placement, all that kind of stuff. You also have more and more what we're seeing in codes, or what we're putting in codes, are use-specific standards. So if I'm going to allow a whatever by right, a bed and breakfast in, if I'm going to allow that by right, it's allowed by right. You don't have to come in for a hearing. You don't have to, it's not a conditional use or special exception. You get to do it, but here are the conditions on which you have to abide in order to do it. And that could be, bed and breakfast can only have 10 rooms or something like that. And so those specific uses are called out in the zoning code. And that's across the jurisdiction across the community. It's not generally it's not, what you have, which is, well, the bed and breakfast can do one thing in the AZD and maybe something else in the intense village, and then there's other conditions depending on. That's very granular, and it's okay, but we have to figure out, if you want to do it that way, we have to figure out how to make that simple somehow, because essentially, like Bill was saying, you have definitions embedded in the name of the use, which is unusual. To simplify this, I think we need to simplify the use definitions, the number of uses, consolidate some of the uses, amend some of the uses, simplify their, like I said, their defined terms, and put conditions on them which are countywide and not specific to each different district. I think if we do that, it'll simplify things greatly. And also, you have to ask yourself on each of these uses, which of these conditions matter? Was this put in 2003 to address something that happened then that is no longer an issue? And that's the point of this process too, is to go through each of these and say, are we regulating what matters today and in the future? Or are we just hanging on to regulations from the past because we've always done it this way? So that's, every community goes through that same discussion when you update the zoning code. So I would encourage, we can take a first stab at it, but your community best. I would encourage you to take a look at those uses and say, what is this? What is it doing? Do we still need this? Can we simplify it? Like I said, I can take a crack at that for you, but it might be just even better for you all to take a look at it and do that exercise. But yeah, that's how we simplify this code, I think.
Thank you, Sean.
Bill
Go ahead,
Mackey.
Bill.
I think, Sean, what I would like to see is, I would like to see that first stab done by you. What are modern terms? What recommendations would you make to us? We'll have that document well in advance of December 14th from you. Then that can be made public. We can receive public comments, and then the task force can sort of respond to that in that meeting.
That makes good sense. So really, we need to drill into Article 3 in these uses and propose modernization, simplification, and in a more simple way to also portray or communicate it in the code. So I'm happy to do that. I think that's going to be a very valuable exercise for everybody.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. I think, and Joe mentioned this, I think it would be extremely helpful. And I'm assuming that you've worked with a lot of different counties and counties that are the same as Kent County, an agricultural county, to what regulations do they have? I think if we could, whatever, Page County in Illinois, which is and I'm just making that up, is, from your perspective, would be the same as Kent County, and this is what they did. This is what they have. And then you could glean from all of that. I don't know how many, do you have counties that are similar to Kent County that you've worked with?
I just did one in Wayne County, Ohio.
Wayne County, where?
Wayne County, Ohio.
Ohio.
It is not on any body of water, but it is rural and as similar in sort of its population, might be a little larger population wise. But anyway, they don't have any zoning. They have subdivision regulations only that try to do all the things that zoning does. So that's one extreme this way. And I think you guys are probably pushing the other extreme where you have a lot of regulations for a fairly small population. You have a large land area, very large land area, but you don't have a big population. So it's very spread out population wise. So that would be, yeah, I mean, we can, no two places are exactly the same, but we can get some examples of some similar counties in your region and show you what they've done. It's always good to benchmark, although, no two places are exactly the same. You've got a lot of conservation areas, which I think adds to the complexity, which is good. I mean, we want to conserve our natural resources in the ag areas, so that's all very positive. But I think this comes down to the granularity or the specificity of each and every use that has been contemplated over the last so many years. Because my guess is, and I don't know, Carly, you can probably tell us that some of this was carried over from even previous ordinances, right?
I would assume so, but I'm not certain.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of this stuff may go back. I don't know when the first zoning was adopted in the county, but, it may go back 50, 60, 70 years. It just kind of gets carried forward. This happens in every community. It just happens, you don't review it that often. And once in a generation, you get to take a fresh look at it and you say, that's from 1962. I don't know if the world is the same in 2022. Maybe we need to take a fresh look at that, or update it, or modernize it, or so. So yeah, I think it'll be a worthwhile exercise to do that.
I do have a copy of our first land use ordinance. It was 6 pages.
Oh, see, and you ask what rural counties do. A lot of rural counties, that's exactly what they do. Very, very limited, because most of it's agriculture, and a lot of it's handled through subdivisions, access management standards, things like that. Just because there's just not a whole lot of development to worry about zoning for. But I think it's good what you all are doing. It's just, we have to take a fresh look and say, is this necessary? Go through each of these, say, is this necessary? And you may say yes, you may say, I have no idea what this is for. Let's get rid of it. So.
Thank you. What's next? Are we going to recommendations, or do you have enough for Sean?
Did you get through your list?
I did.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So it
Mr.
looks
Chair?
like Mr. Saunders had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead. I can't see
How
his
y'all
hands.
doing? I was listening at can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
I was listening to what Sean was saying, and one thing that we have to realize is that we're dealing with something back there 20, 25 years ago that we don't want to change. We got to, what happened 25 years ago probably won't meet what we want to do today. It's like he said, we might have something that said a rule that came out in 63 that no longer exists now, that we don't need it. I think that we need to take a real good look at what we are getting into and say, this is what the county actually need today, and go from there. I mean, he might can cut that document down a whole lot by looking at it and saying, oh, we don't need this no more because this happened in 1976. We're dealing with 2022. The whole thing done changed. Is that correct, Sean?
Yes, it is correct. I think this is the time to do it. If you're ever going to do it, this is the time.
If you're going to do it, you might as well step up to the plate in 2022. We can't hold on to 1980. It's gone. That's the way I look at it.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, sir. So the next item on your agenda is the proposed task force recommendations. The document that's included is identical to the document that you have seen before with changes at the very end. I've tried to capture what you all talked about on May 25th and July 27th. That appears on what's called page 7 of 8 and page 8 of 8. So if you all have any comments that you think I didn't get it right or anything you want to change, I'm happy to do that. At this point, I think we've been over all the ones before this multiple times, and I haven't heard any changes to those. So if you think I've captured it, let me know. If you think I haven't captured it, let me know and I can make changes. And then this document would, after this meeting and those changes, would move forward to be your task force recommendations that will be available for the public to make comments on at the public forum on December 14th. You can again make changes to them if you wish to at this time. Again, these recommendations are intended to reflect what we heard during the meetings. In some cases, we did do a questionnaire and there were tallies, and so we counted up tallies for items that you all had decided not to have further discussion on. And then there's other items that you discussed in depth. And at the end of the meeting, we tried to tease out sort of what was heard. And that's been a collaborative process with the chair and with the members. And I welcome any comments you may have. I think for the July 27th, it was pretty straightforward. We were reviewing items that didn't necessarily, that you all didn't necessarily want to see changes to. So one was an action report and one was the final wrap up on noise ordinance. So thank you, Mr.
On that elimination of the enclave development, I sensed that the task force would eliminate the enclave.
Okay.
That was my understanding, and that's somewhat reflected in our minutes, I thought, but
Okay.
if I'm wrong, but it said,
So task force would like to see elimination of the enclave standards.
that's what I heard, and
Okay.
and I said that myself. We
right.
had another task force member, Miss Reeder spoke in favor of keeping it, Miss Lewis against, and two members spoke, a second member spoke against the permitted use of enclaves. Third expressed opposition to the enclave concept.
Okay.
That was my
Thank you.
understanding. I'll let the
appreciate that.
task force or staff if I've misread that.
So sure that I agree with eliminating the entire enclave situation. As much as I would suggest that maybe the elimination of some of the rules and restrictions that have to go along with the enclave subdivision. So, but that's my feeling on it. Not, I'm not sure I was at that meeting anyway. But
Yeah, I don't
I
remember.
think I said I was in agreement with eliminating the whole thing because I think we've only had one enclave or two enclaves done since it came into effect. And I think that that's more used as a valuation tool for our land, when I think it's giving a false value of our land, when you use that, because how can you even use it? So the enclave situation could be totally different if you didn't have to be 600 feet away from somebody. In fact, it would even be better because you might utilize less productive soil types that you can put housing on versus putting it out in the middle of a field and just creating an island down the field. So I don't think that the whole thing was really discussed well enough, or I haven't heard enough about it, to really sit there and make a recommendation by the task force that we totally eliminate the enclave. So I think you could maybe eliminate parts of that, but just eliminating that option is just one more restriction in the ordinance. And with whatever we can do here, which is, I'm just not so sure I get along with that. So I'm on record for saying that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
This is Cindy. I agree with Bill, with Billy Norris. I think we had a discussion on what that enclave is, but maybe not eliminating it completely, but reviewing along the same lines as the comments that have been made tonight, does that need to be updated? Are there standards that should be changed or modified based on what land use principles we want to adopt here? So I would not support elimination, but a further review of the requirements. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. I guess, Bill, oh, go ahead. Another.
Yeah, I would support Bill and Cindy on that. And here again, this is something that I think our consultant, do any other counties have this type of zoning? This is what we need from him. I mean, that's.
I agree.
That's what we need to have before we can proceed with a lot of things.
I can't believe a lot of this. When we got a consultant that has sat here and listened to the entire a 2-year operation here that we have, and he makes a comment that we are at one far extreme with all our regulations here in this county. And experiencing some of it myself over the last 40 years, active in that line of work in the county, and have our consultant that we're paying money to state that, we really haven't accomplished much here. I can't put my name on that. And I mean, I think he's right. But from what this document is, you gotta have a real agenda to read every word of that document. And the time frame that we've had that document, and be able to make an educated advice to the public of this county. And I think that what's happening here is that there are too few people in the county that are benefiting from the mass amount of restrictions we have. And I think as I said in the very first day I came on this task force, that we need to think about what's best for the entire county population, not just a group of people or a smaller enclave of people that want things a certain way. And the general public has no idea what we're doing right now. And we've talked about that. I don't know how you improve that. But for us to end up with the same document that Sean is saying is virtually the same and more, is not at all what we set out to do or what I set out to do being on this task force. And that's where I stand with it. So I'm not real happy with where we're ending up at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can actually address, and I'm happy to have Carla chime in. The provisions of the enclave are, I think, fairly recognizable standards. There's ideas that were promoted by a gentleman named Randall Arendt about cluster subdivision in rural areas. I think this is a represented kind of development across the nation. So I think it's a fairly, again, recognizable form of development. So I don't think it's a surprise. So it's fair enough. I get the nod.
None. Thank you. Any on the recommendations, elimination by the recommendations recommended for elimination by staff and requests recommended by staff. Any comments, any of those? Or we think we talked about them all, and I didn't, but some of this could be handled, I think, is definition wise. I think that's where we're woefully, I think, Pat, the terms and things, and some of these definitions would help simplify the ordinance too. Any other questions or comments on what we heard tonight? The public, staff, Bill, you want to summarize anything for our next effort? Where we go from here? A little bit of planning for staff and
Our next
Committee.
scheduled event is our public forum on December the 14th. Our goal is to take the input you give us tonight and have the consultant prepare some track changes in the clean document that shows some of the substance we've talked about. So Sean, I would want you to take the existing clean document and make a track changes document that shows the changes you're proposing for consideration by the task force. We'll make that available to the public. The task force will take a look at that, hear public comment, and then we'll receive comments from you. And at that point, I'm hoping that we are closing out the consultant portion of the product. Then that product with your recommendations, along with the separate list of recommendations, will be presented to the Board of County Commissioners for their instructions to me on how they'd like to proceed. Thank you. And I've had a lot of calls from people about the mapping section. We haven't started mapping. Mapping would be next calendar year. So for folks who are interested in proposing a change of zoning to their property, they still have time to get a letter in or fill out a form. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Go ahead.
December 14th meeting, Bill Salton be bringing these examples of counties similar to ours. Would that be part of that?
Well, tonight I heard that there was a request for sort of examples of other codes similar to ours. I would think, Sean, if you're able to just provide me with links to those similar codes, I can send those out to the task force and you all
That'd
can review them independently. We can, put those links on our website for the public to look at. It's just examples of other jurisdictions, I understand. Okay.
But is it public to know what code is more restrictive and how much more restrictive or not as restrictive at this public meeting? Because they may think, hey, this is the only way it can go. This is how it has to be. But other counties similar to ours, they do it this way.
Obviously, I want to see, I've said all along, I'd love to see a code, of what they've done, more for formatting. I think it's the task force and the community and the public decide how restrictive, that's subjective. Howard counties may be more restrictive than ours for a reason or less, but I think it's more how that's laid out. If it's simpler, easier to read, that's what these public hearings are for, decide how if it's restrictive or not.
And I did think we provided some samples for formatting previously last year. So, but I understand that this is more of a content request from you all, how things are regulated in other rural counties. So I don't expect there to be an analysis of those documents, but simply those documents provided as samples.
As long as we have.
Yeah.
We can see.
Okay. All righty. Okay.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything for the?
Yeah,
greater good
hello,
of the-
Mr. Chair. Hello, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can't.
Yeah. Hi, this is Chip McLeod.
Hey, Chip. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can hear me okay?
I can. Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Is this the right time? Is this the right time for public comment on the proposed task force recommendation?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'd like to speak on behalf of Mr. Russ Richardson and the cooperating property owners that are working to master plan the growth area, the designated growth area there in Millington. And I know this isn't a new aspect of these proposed task force recommendations, but I just wanted to put on the record comment related to P4 on the first page of the task force recommendations. And to point out that, obviously the task force has been meeting, as others have said, this meeting for 2 years and what have you. Much has changed in the landscape in Millington, and there's a lot going on, as many of you know, as far as looking at the growth area in and around the town of Millington. And this recommendation from the task force, to me, really deserves, updating and rethinking. And deference to the town of Millington is so important when it comes to planning that growth area. But since this recommendation was put on paper, there's been an election in the town. There's a new mayor, and I think deference ought to be given before we keep seeing this document repeatedly about that's the way it's going to be in Millington. And I just hope we could, maybe change the perspective here and say there's a wonderful opportunity happening in the growth area in Millington as far as master planning with a lot of community involvement. In fact, and this is what I wanted to point out, if you can still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm just about finished. I'm sorry. There is actually a community planning charrette, community workshop that is scheduled for October 26th, 7th, and 8th, coming up in about a month in Millington to really engage the community to talk about that area. So I just want to say that because whenever we see this recommendation about what's going to happen in Millington, it's just not out of touch as with what's going on today. And I think if there's any group that it'd be good to see just sort of leaning towards it's a group like this, what's happening as far as planning in Kent County. And with that, I'll end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. All right. Drive safe for getting home.